February 26, 1945. The first light over Iwo Jima doesn't look like a sunrise. It looks like someone has pulled a grey curtain over the sky. The sea is restless, the air smells faintly of sulfur, and in the landing craft's cramped metal belly, Private Wilson Watson shifts the weight of the one thing every other man in his squad is glad he's carrying instead of them. The Browning automatic rifle. Almost 20 pounds of steel and would before you even start adding ammunition. It digs into his shoulder, pulls on the sling, and makes his whole silhouette slightly off balance every time the boat slams into a wave. Around him, other Marines cradle their M1 rifles, half the weight, faster to reload, easier to aim from awkward positions. The kind of weapon the manuals are written around. The bar is not that kind of weapon. In training, instructors called it a squad support gun, a walking fire tool from another era. The story was always the same. It had been born too late for the First World War and was too clumsy for the Second. Good for fixed positions, for covering lanes of approach, for firing from a sandbag nest while everyone else moves. Not something you want when you have to sprint over jagged rock, dive into craters, and react to targets that appear and vanish in seconds. The boat shudders, then steadies. Ahead, through the open top, Watson sees Iwo Jima growing larger, its black shoreline, the broken fragments of defenses already chewed by naval fire, the ominous slopes that rise beyond. Somewhere under those ridges, in tunnels and chambers no aerial photo has fully revealed, thousands of defenders are waiting. They've had months to study how Marines fight. What no one in those tunnels has planned for is a single Marine deciding that the heaviest, most inconvenient weapon in the squad is exactly the right one for the worst hill on the island. Watson shifts his grip and lets the weight of the bar settle where it always does, deep into the muscles of his back and shoulders. He's been carrying it for months now, from Paris Island to Camp Pendleton to countless practice assaults up dusty California hills where instructors shout about fire and movement. Every step has reinforced the same message. The bar is a burden. Valuable in theory, but something you pay for with sweat long before you ever pull the trigger. The irony is that back home, before the Marine Corps, he had learned to shoot in exactly the opposite way. Rural Alabama fields, an old bolt-action rifle, and a father who counted every cartridge like a coin. One shot for one animal. No waste. No hurry. Patience was a virtue and extra rounds in the magazine were a comfort, not a license. Now, he carries a weapon that can empty its entire magazine in less than 2 seconds if the selector is in the wrong place and the trigger finger is too eager. Someone at the front of the boat yells a time check. The ramp isn't down yet, but the craft is close enough to feel the waves shifting under a shallower bottom. Watson looks along the line of helmets in front of him. Nobody is talking. They've already had their briefings, seen the overhead photos, heard the officers' careful explanations about an island turned inside out by engineers and explosives. The defenders on Iwo Jima are not planning to throw themselves across open ground in dramatic charges. They intend to stay out of sight, make every yard cost something, and let the island itself do the heavy work. Watson taps one of the curved magazines in the pouch on his chest, feeling the full weight of the cartridges inside. 20 rounds in each. A comfortable number on paper, until you remember how fast they can vanish. He's carrying as many as he can manage without collapsing. Metal boxes pressing into his ribs and hip, more strapped to his belt, a few tucked into strange corners of his gear. Ammunition for a weapon no one is quite sure they really want. When the ramp finally slams down, the first thing he sees is not the enemy. It's sand, but not the kind he's used to. Iwo Jima's beach is black and soft, volcanic grains that swallow boots and slow every step like a shallow swamp. Marines in the first waves are already struggling forward. Bent under loads, silhouetted against a shoreline that looks burned even before the fighting truly begins. Watson follows his squad out, the bar pulling on him with every step, the ocean sucking at his legs before he breaks clear of the surf. The air is full of engine noise, shouted orders, the clatter of metal on metal as more ramps drop. Off to the sides, enormous shells from the fleet continue to land farther inland, sending up geysers of dust and debris. What's missing is small arms fire. No lines of tracers sweeping the water. No immediate storm of machine gun bursts raking the sand. Just the echo of artillery and the low, constant roar of distant bombardment. The enemy is watching, counting, memorizing. It feels wrong. He has heard it would feel wrong. Intelligence briefings on the ship had been very clear. The defending commander has studied every previous landing. He knows that trying to stop Marines at the surf is pointless when there are cruisers and battleships lined up offshore. He will let them come in. Let them pile up in dense clusters with no cover. Then, when the element of surprise is fully his, when every gun is pre-aimed and every mortar crew is waiting with corrected ranges, he will start the real fight. Watson and his squad push forward, away from the water line, toward the first faint rises where the ground offers marginal shelter. The bar's sling bites into his shoulder. The weapon's muzzle picks up grains of black sand with every bump. He can feel the extra effort in his legs as he climbs what should be a simple incline. The beach still looks almost deserted. Marines are scattered, some crouching, some kneeling, some trying to orient themselves in a landscape that from the air had seemed so clear and from the ground feels like an uneven sea of craters. The sky has that pale, early light that makes distance hard to judge. He glances up at the ridges. Somewhere, unseen, observers are marking the movement of each cluster of Marines. It's like stepping onto a stage without knowing where the audience sits or where the spotlights are hidden. In his mind, Watson compares this scene to the exercises where he was told to set up the bar as a fixed point, anchor the squad's fire, and support teammates who advance. That picture assumed he knew where the enemy was. It assumed the opponent would show themselves clearly enough to be pinned down by sustained fire from a known direction. Here, there are no such guarantees. He balances the weapon in his hands and adjusts the strap of one of his ammunition belts. Whatever this day becomes, one thing is already clear. The way he was taught to use this gun will not survive first contact with an island built to erase everything predictable. By the time Watson's platoon has moved about 300 yards inland, the shoreline behind them looks like a crowded, irregular line of figures trying to find any kind of shelter. Ahead, the ground rises in uneven steps, low ridges, and shallow depressions leading toward heavier slopes and, somewhere beyond those, the objective that has been circled on every map for days, a hill whose number they all know but whose true character none of them has seen up close. On the deck of the transport ship the day before, the briefing had turned that hill into a symbol. The officer at the front had used a pointer on grainy aerial photos, outlining slopes, ridgelines, possible enemy positions. He had spoken about how the defenders had shifted from meeting the Marines at the water's edge to pulling back into depth, turning every elevation into a built-in firing platform. Do not assume, he had said, that because you have walked over a piece of ground, it is yours. Those words return now, uninvited, as Watson feels the volcanic soil under his boots. He sees no visible bunkers from here, no clear openings in the rock that shout danger, but the entire slope ahead has that uneasy look of something that has been shaped by hands he cannot see. The platoon spreads out as much as the terrain allows, following the gestures of their sergeants. The bar makes it harder for Watson to move at a sprint, but he has learned to work with its momentum. The weapon swings slightly as he changes direction, and he compensates by letting his whole body follow. Every few steps, he tightens his grip on the stock, feeling the familiar checkering under his fingers. He thinks briefly about the manual description: effective out to hundreds of yards, high rate of fire, designed to lay down covering bursts for advancing friends. In the European fields where it was first imagined, that might have made simple sense. Lines of troops, clear sight lines, open spaces where a gun like his could mow down attackers across a wide swath. Iwo Jima is not a field. It is a maze. Even before the first enemy round lands, he knows that engagements here are going to be measured in dozens of yards, not hundreds. Targets will appear and disappear through narrow slots in the rock, shoot from invisible recesses, and then vanish through tunnels that run like secret veins under the surface. When the deceptive quiet finally cracks, it does so without warning. A mortar round falls near the middle of the platoon's formation, close enough that Watson feels the concussion through the ground. There is a sharp flash, a spray of black sand, and then the familiar, unsettling chorus of voices as Marines drop to the ground, call to each other, and try to identify where the attack is coming from. The second and third rounds arrive almost immediately, walking along the line of advance with an accuracy that makes it clear these aren't random shots. The defenders have registered this stretch of ground in advance. They are simply turning on something they prepared days or weeks ago. Watson hits the dirt, the bar pressed under him, its weight a sudden comfort against the instinctive urge to cling to anything solid. Shards of volcanic rock patter around him like hard rain. He hears the distinctive chatter of enemy machine guns join the deeper pulses of American weapons as other Marines react and return fire toward the slopes. The soundscape is different from training. There is no neat separation between our side and their side. Echoes bounce off ridges, making it hard to isolate any single source. Japanese light machine guns, with their faster rhythm, create a continuous hum. Rifles punctuate that with sharper cracks. Somewhere behind him, an American weapon sends slower, heavier beats into the mix. "Get to the low ground," his squad leader shouts, indicating a shallow dip ahead that offers at least a momentary break from direct fire. Watson moves, the bar dragging at him, but he knows from experience that lying still in this kind of layout is as dangerous as moving. The defenders have not only plotted their fields of fire, they've also planned their indirect patterns. A Marine who stays put too long is a Marine standing on a coordinate a man in a tunnel knows by heart. They slide down into the depression, pressed close together for a moment, then fan out again as soon as they hit the bottom. The sand here is churned up, marked by earlier shells. It is a reminder that they are not the first wave to pass this way, and likely will not be the last. Watson's first clear glimpse of an enemy position comes in the form of muzzle flash, a brief tongue of light from a cave mouth cut into the hillside about 60 yards away. The gun inside sweeps across the area above their heads, sending a stream of tracers into the slope where other Marines are trying to advance. This is the kind of moment every bar man is supposed to be waiting for. He drops to a knee, swings the weapon toward the opening, and catches himself almost automatically reaching for the folded bipod under the barrel. It is what doctrine says he should do: anchor the gun, plant it, and lay down precise bursts until the target is silenced or forced to keep its head down. He locks the legs, presses the stock into his shoulder, and sights in. The weapon responds the way it always does. The recoil is firm but manageable. The front sight climbs and settles in a rhythm he knows well. He squeezes controlled bursts, trying to keep the barrel steady on the shadowed rectangle of rock where the enemy gun sits. For a moment, it feels like the diagrams in the training manual brought to life. Then the ground around him erupts. 3 mortar rounds land in a rough triangle around his position, one close enough that fragments of stone and sand lash across his back like a physical shove. The cave gun spotted him the second he set up a stable firing point, and somewhere deeper in the hill, a man with a field telephone relayed those coordinates to a mortar crew that had been waiting for that exact pattern. Watson rolls away, instinct overriding everything. The bar clatters beside him. He doesn't need anyone to explain what just happened. The hill has just taught him a lesson far more clearly than a chalkboard ever could. If he behaves like a fixed weapon, the defenders will treat him like one. Dangerous for an instant, then neutralized. He drags himself behind a chunk of broken rock, breathing hard, heart pounding not just from the close impact but from the jolt of realizing how narrow the margin is. He looks up the slope again. The cave is still there. The machine gun inside is still firing in bursts, punishing any Marine who tries to move across the open. Somewhere to his left, his squad leader empties a clip from his Garand, trying to pick off the gunner or spotter, but the opening is deep. Whoever is inside is using the rock itself as armor, exposing only slivers of themselves at unpredictable moments. Watson wipes grit from his face with the back of his hand and glances at the bar lying beside him, bipod legs still extended. If he uses it the way they told him to, he realizes the hill is going to win. He folds the bipod up with a quick, rough motion and feels the weapon regaining its character as something portable rather than anchored. The barrel is beginning to warm, but it is still far from its limits. The magazine in place is half empty, maybe less. He runs a quick mental calculation: ammunition count, distance to target, available cover between here and there. The plan that forms in his head does not come from any neat diagram he has ever seen. It comes from a lifetime of understanding that sometimes the only way out of a trap is forward. The next time the machine gun in the cave opens up, Watson doesn't stay where he is. He doesn't drop to a knee and assume a textbook firing position. Instead, he pushes off from cover and starts moving up the slope directly toward the opening that has been spitting traces and noise into the world for the last minute. It feels completely wrong and completely necessary at the same time. The ground under his boots is uneven, a mix of loose sand and jagged fragments of rock that try to twist his ankles with every stride. The bar's weight, which had been a punishment on the flat beach, turns into a kind of anchor now, keeping his muzzle more stable than a lighter rifle would as he fires short bursts on the move. He doesn't try to hold the trigger down. He knows exactly how quickly a 20-round magazine can vanish, and he is not interested in hearing the empty click at the halfway point of his run. Instead, he squeezes off measured strings, 2 or 3 rounds at a time, painting the area around the cave mouth with a pattern of impacts that force whoever is inside to duck rather than aim. From the perspective of the defenders, it must be a confusing sight. They are used to Marines dropping to the ground, spreading out, trying to find angles from a distance. There is an expectation baked into their design of this place: the attackers will stay as far away as possible for as long as possible. Watson does the opposite. Every second he spends closing the gap is a second in which the defender's advantage in pre-sighted ranges and indirect fire becomes less relevant. Mortar crews can't safely drop rounds on a target that is almost on top of their own position. Range tables mean little when the problem is a moving silhouette crossing 50 yards in a shallow arc. He feels the bar's stock recoil into his shoulder, the vibrations running through his upper body. Every burst is a trade, cartridges for seconds of suppressed enemy fire, brass on the ground for a narrow window to move again. The air around him is still filled with other sounds, his squad's rifles, distant weapons on other parts of the line, the ever-present crack of rounds that might be meant for him or for someone else entirely. The distance shrinks faster than he would have believed from the bottom of the slope. 40 yards. 30. He can see more detail now, the darker outline of the cave entrance, the way the rock has been cut or blasted to give a wider arc of fire, the faint flicker from inside when the machine gun tries to answer his aggression with its own. At about 20 yards, he stops thinking about the magazine count. He knows it's low. He also knows that this is the point where stopping to reload would be more dangerous than squeezing out the last of what he has. He settles his stance, braces the weapon, and sends the remaining cartridges in one long, controlled stream directly into the cave mouth and the shadowed space just inside it. The bar answers with a steady, powerful push, its characteristic rhythm making it feel less like a burst and more like drawing a line of force across the stone. Sparks jump from the edges where rounds hit rock and fragment, sending secondary shards deeper into the confined space. When the bolt finally locks back on an empty magazine, the machine gun in the cave is silent. Watson drops behind a nearby chunk of rock, slams the old magazine out, and jams a fresh one home with the practiced motion of someone who has done this so often in training that his hands move faster than his thoughts. He takes a breath, listens, and hears something important: the absence of that particular enemy rhythm in the overall noise. Around him, other Marines have seen what just happened, even if they didn't catch every detail. The impression they're left with is simple. One man with an automatic weapon moves straight at a position that had held them, and now that position is no longer firing. No one cheers. There is no time, and this is not that kind of story. But the way people shift, the way they start moving forward again, says enough. A small piece of the hill that felt untouchable from a distance is suddenly reachable. Watson doesn't have the luxury of enjoying the moment. He knows exactly what he spent: one full magazine, part of another, and a fair amount of energy. He checks his pouches, counts quickly. He still has more than half his loadout, but the math has acquired a sharper edge. Every engagement at this tempo eats a visible chunk of his reserves. The lesson he has just learned is double-edged. The bar can erase a strong point in seconds at close range. It can turn a sheltered opening into a narrow, unforgiving zone for anyone behind it. But it does so by trading ammunition for time, and time is not the only resource that can run out. As the platoon regroups and continues upward, the landscape begins to change. The first slopes give way to more broken terrain, scattered rocks, and low ridges that blur one into another. Somewhere above, the objective hill waits, its surface a patchwork of scars and hidden entrances. Squad leaders talk quietly, gesturing with their hands as they sketch routes between hulks of shattered terrain. The plan, such as it is, centers on momentum. Keep moving, press into the seams between enemy positions, don't give the defenders the leisure to fully reset. Watson adjusts his sling again and falls into his place in the formation. His shoulders protest, but his mind is elsewhere now, replaying the brief, intense rush at the cave and the way the defenders failed to handle it effectively. They had been ready for him to be a distant problem. They had not been ready for him to step into their comfort zone. He wonders, not for the first time, who exactly decided that this weapon was too heavy for close combat and why that judgment had survived long enough to become law in so many training modules. Weight is real. Exhaustion is real. But so is the effect of putting that extra mass, that extra stability, into the right place at the right time. At the next small halt, while the platoon's officers confer with company leadership over the radio, he has a moment to look back down the hill. From here, the beach is a dark strip, dotted with moving figures and vehicles. The ocean beyond glints dully. It looks far away now, in more ways than just physical distance. He is no longer a man carrying an awkward piece of equipment because someone higher up handed it to him. He is beginning to understand that he is carrying a tool tailored, by accident or design, to a kind of fighting the people who wrote the manuals had barely imagined. What he doesn't know yet is that this realization will be tested again, and far more brutally, long before the day is over. The push toward the main hill is not a straight line. It is a series of staggered climbs and dips, each one threaded by a path found on the fly rather than plotted on any neat map. The island's interior feels less like land and more like the inside of something that has been hollowed out and filled with hidden intent. Every time Watson's unit crests a minor rise, they see another beyond it. Every cluster of rocks could hide a tunnel mouth. Every patch of sand could mark a collapsed position or the entrance to something still active. The defenders have built depth not in a single dramatic wall, but in layers that never fully end. Still, progress is made. They reach intermediate objectives, clear them, mark them for following units, and keep moving. At each point, the bar proves its worth in short, sharp bursts, silencing a firing slit that appears without warning, pushing an enemy group back from a piece of broken wall, covering a short rush between bits of cover when someone has to cross a particularly exposed gap. What changes gradually is not the number of engagements, but their character. The Japanese defenders are no longer facing a company that behaves exactly according to the manual. They are facing Marines who, prompted by necessity and by examples like Watson's earlier rush, have begun to treat close-in movement and fire as a single fluid action rather than two separate phases. The hill that dominates their sector, one of several numbered heights on Iwo Jima's fractured surface, looms closer with each advance. On the aerial photos, it had looked like a smooth contour line, an abstract shape on a flat page. From here, it resembles a jagged crown, its edges irregular, its sides interrupted by small outcrops and darker smudges that might be cave mouths or simply shadows. The plan is to take that hill and hold it as a forward observation and firing point, a place from which they can direct supporting arms more effectively and prevent the defenders from using it as a platform against the beaches. In concept, it is simple. Heights matter, and whoever occupies them has the better view and better angles. The defenders, unfortunately, understand this at least as well as the attackers. As Watson's platoon nears the lower slopes, mortar rounds begin to fall again, this time with a more concentrated pattern. They are not random. They are walking across likely assembly areas, pausing just long enough to force Marines to scatter before shifting to the next probable cover spot. Machine gun bursts from concealed openings add to the pressure, forcing heads down, punishing anyone who misjudges the timing of a dash. The platoon continues anyway, because they have learned that staying in one place is worse. They reach a point below the crest where the ground flattens slightly. It is not safe, but it is the closest thing to a staging area they are likely to get. From here, they can see parts of the top, fragments of sky, and occasional hints of movement against the backdrop of dark stone. Orders come down, push to the summit, clear any positions, establish a foothold. Other elements are making corresponding moves on neighboring heights. The idea, as always, is to stretch the defenders, make them react on multiple fronts simultaneously. Watson checks his magazines again. The earlier fights have cost him a noticeable portion of his load, but he has been careful, never allowing the exhilaration of the bar's power to override his sense of rationing. He can still count several full magazines by touch, their weight a reassurance against the uncertainties above. They move. The climb from the shoulder of the hill to its top is short in distance but long in effort. The slope is steeper here, the footing treacherous. The volcanic soil gives way under boots, sliding back with each step. Occasionally, a hand finds purchase on rock, only for it to crumble slightly, leaving grit on fingers and palms. There is fire, but not as much as they feared. Some shots snap overhead. A few crack past close enough to be felt as miniature shocks of displaced air. But the defenders are not pouring everything they have into this moment. That alone should be a warning. Though not everyone recognizes it immediately. Watson's squad crests the top with other squads, spreading out quickly, searching for obvious threats. There are shallow depressions, broken stones, a few blast marks where shells have previously landed. No visible enemy positions, no immediate points of contact. For a fleeting moment, it almost feels like success. They start to do what Marines are taught to do whenever they take ground: improve it. People dig in, identify sectors, relay locations back to the rear so that artillery and supporting weapons can adjust. The top of the hill becomes a small, busy hive of activity as men try to turn this exposed piece of terrain into something they can survive on for more than a few minutes. Watson, positioned along one edge of the crest, looks down the slope on the far side. From here, the island continues in a series of dips and rises, cut by ravines and dotted with irregular formations. It looks quiet, but so did the beach before the first mortar rounds fell. He keeps the bar at the ready, eyes scanning for unnatural movement, the kind that doesn't match the random flicker of smoke or dust. The counterstroke, when it comes, starts with a single round that lands behind them instead of in front. It detonates partway down the slope they use to climb up, close enough to the path that several Marines instinctively turn to look. The second round lands slightly higher, closer to the crest. The third is higher still. Someone realizes what is happening at almost the same moment that everyone else does. The defenders have the top of the hill precisely plotted and are now walking fire up to it from the rear. The path they used to get here is being cut off by the same invisible calculus that shaped the beach. Spread out. Get low. Voices shout, but the space is limited. The hilltop is not large. It is a compact area with few natural shelters. Every crater offers cover and also attracts fire once it is occupied. Every piece of rock that shields one side leaves another exposed. One of the bursts takes down the Marine who had been serving as their main link back to the rear, a man with a coil of wire and a handset that, 30 seconds earlier, had been their line to battalion headquarters. The wire itself vanishes in a spray of fragmented metal and sand. In an instant, the hilltop goes from being a forward node in a larger network to an island in its own right, untethered and uncertain. Watson hits the ground as another salvo lands, his body instinctively curling around the bar to keep it from bouncing away. Shards of stone slice small lines into his sleeves and the exposed skin at the back of his neck. He feels the percussive wave roll over him, pressing the air out of his lungs for a heartbeat. When the sequence of impacts finally stops, it leaves behind a different kind of sound. Not silence. There is always some distant firing, some shouted order carried on the wind, but a local pause, a shallow, held breath. He pushes himself up enough to look around. The neat arrangement of Marines on the crest is gone. In its place is a scattered pattern of individuals and small groups, each clinging to whatever contour or depression they could find when the barrage started. Some are closer to the island's interior side, others nearer the rear slope. Lines of communication, verbal, visual, electrical, have been broken or bent. It is exactly the moment an enemy waiting in underground chambers would have been told to prepare for. Down the slope facing the interior, figures begin to appear between rocks and from low openings in the ground. They move with the cautious confidence of troops who believe the ground ahead has already done most of their work for them. Their steps are measured, rifles and light machine guns at the ready but not raised to full alert. Someone, somewhere below, has told them that the Marines on this hill are cut off, shaken, and reduced. Watson's first thought is practical. How clearly can they see him, and how clearly can he see them? The answer, unfortunately for the attackers, is that the distances here are short enough that clarity is not the issue. He shifts the bar into position, feeling the familiar weight settle into the pocket of his shoulder. His legs burn from the climb and the scramble under fire. His ears are still ringing from the barrage, but his hands are steady, and the weapon's contours are as familiar to him as the ridges on his own palms. The next few minutes will not be about doctrine. They will be about what one person can do with a misunderstood piece of equipment when all the neatly printed pages have been blasted away. The first group that comes into full view is small, a squad at most. They emerge from a low tunnel entrance about 40 yards down the slope, spreading out in a loose line. Their posture says a lot. They aren't moving like people who expect serious resistance. Their weapons are ready, but they walk instead of sprinting. Their attention is divided between the crest and the sides, more interested in making sure no one escapes than in preparing for a fierce fight. From where he lies, Watson can see them clearly against the darker ground. The light is still flat, the air hazy with lingering dust, but the contrast is enough. They are shapes he can track, distances he can intuit without needing a range estimate. He does not wait for them to get closer. The bar selector is already set for automatic when he steadies the weapon. He chooses his moment carefully, a beat when several of the approaching soldiers are between bits of cover rather than behind them. Then he squeezes the trigger and lets the weapon speak with the voice that had seemed so unsuited for this island just hours earlier. The burst is not wild. It is firm, controlled, stitched across the advancing line in a shallow arc. The recoil pushes back into his shoulder in that now familiar rhythm. In the space of a few seconds, the squad goes from moving shapes to a scattered group trying to hug the ground where moments before they had been sure-footed. From a distance, another Marine watching from a different angle will later say it looked as if a switch had been flipped. 1 second, the slope held a neat line of advancing figures. The next, they were down and the open stretch between them and the tunnel entrance was empty. For Watson, it is less dramatic and more procedural. He feels the magazine winding toward empty, senses the point where continuation would yield diminishing returns, and releases the trigger. The sudden silence from his own weapon is almost jarring against the background noise. He ejects the magazine, lets it drop beside him, and replaces it with a fresh one by touch. The motion is automatic now. Press, rock, slap, check. His fingers know the routine even while his eyes stay on the terrain. The enemy below has learned an important lesson in those brief seconds. This hill is not a quiet cleanup task. There is at least one person above who can bring serious, sustained fire to bear. They adjust. The next group that tries to move up the slope is larger and more cautious. They advance in bounds, one part covering while the other moves. They use outcroppings and shallow depressions, making themselves as small a target as possible. Their movement looks more like the textbook drills Watson himself has rehearsed countless times, just mirrored. The difference is that their drill assumes a defender who stays put. Watson has no intention of staying in the same patch of ground long enough for anyone to bracket him with fire. The hilltop is small, but not flat. There are rocks, low folds, bits of shattered surface that break lines of sight in unexpected ways. He uses them the way water uses channels, moving, pausing, moving again. When the second group commits to a particular route, he is no longer at the exact spot where he fired the first burst. He has shifted a few yards along the crest, just enough to change their angles and disrupt whatever ranges they had in mind. The bar comes up again, the stock nestling into his shoulder, and another series of measured bursts reach down the slope. He is not trying to sweep the entire hillside. That would be wasteful. Instead, he picks key points, the moments when the enemy has to cross from one scrap of cover to another, the instant when someone leans out to signal, the tiny pause before a group breaks from stillness into motion. The effect is cumulative. No single burst decides the whole engagement, but each one throws sand into the gears of the attacker's plan. Progress stalls. The line that was supposed to tighten around the hill stretches and then frays. The confidence that had carried the first squad up the slope fades into a more tentative, fragmented approach. As the exchanges continue, Watson feels the bar's barrel warming significantly for the first time. Heat radiates from the metal whenever his hand brushes close. The smell of hot oil and expelled powder hangs close to the weapon. He has been warned about overheating in training, taught to respect the mechanical limits of any automatic gun. But he also knows that this is not a test range. He moderates his rate of fire, not out of respect for a manual, but out of an instinctive understanding that short, placed bursts accomplish more than long, uncontrolled streams. The heavy cartridge the bar fires carries enough energy that even a single hit on rock near an enemy can send splinters and fragments into spaces a direct line cannot reach. Down the slope, Japanese voices carry faintly, words he cannot understand but tones he recognizes, orders, corrections, frustration. Several positions trade fire with him at once now, attempting to pin him down. The impulse to hug one spot tightly and hide is strong. Years of human instinct tell him that if he makes himself small and stays behind the biggest rock, he'll be safer. Experience from the first cave and the memory of mortar blasts tearing at fixed points tell him the opposite. So he keeps moving. A short dash to another piece of cover. A pause, a burst, a glance at the slope. A mental note. That outcropping, that shadow, that particular patch of disturbed sand where someone just tried to move. Then another shift. It is not graceful. His lungs burn. His legs complain. The shoulder that carries the bar stings from cumulative strain. But the pattern is effective. The attackers never quite manage to fix his position, never quite line up their overlapping fields of fire the way they did against more stationary targets earlier in the day. Watson has become a problem that doesn't hold still long enough to be solved in the usual ways. He pays for this agility with something tangible: ammunition. Each engagement trims down his reserve. Each magazine that drops empty beside him is one less future option. But the slope below is beginning to tell its own story. There are fewer coordinated pushes now, more hesitant probes. The enemy is adapting, but not fast enough to fully undo the advantage he has found in this improvised style. Then, in the middle of one of his transitions between positions, the battle changes again, this time with a sudden, sharp impact that is entirely personal. A round from somewhere down the slope catches him in the left shoulder. It is not a dramatic, cinematic throwback. It is a hard, focused punch that spins him sideways and drops him behind a rough ridge of volcanic rock. For a moment, the world narrows to a tight tunnel. Breath, heartbeat, a ringing in his ears that has nothing to do with nearby explosions and everything to do with his own nervous system screaming for attention. He tests his hand. The left arm responds, but not cleanly. The shoulder feels hot and uncooperative. Movement sends sharp signals down his side. He reaches across with his right hand, taps the bar's grip, and feels the relief of solid contact. The weapon is still here. It still works. The question is whether he does. Watson does a quick, rough inventory of himself the way a mechanic might check a damaged engine under pressure. Fingers, grip, trigger hand, eyes, legs. The left shoulder is a mess of pain and stiffness, but the arm is not completely useless. He can flex his hand, though lifting the elbow sends bright lines of discomfort up into his neck. He has no way of knowing the exact path the enemy round took, only that it has not removed his ability to move or to think clearly. In the vocabulary of the battlefield, he is not fully down. He is somewhere in between. The bar lies half across his chest where it landed with him. He shifts it carefully, testing how much his left side can tolerate. Cradling the forend fully with his injured arm is not an option now. He adjusts his grip so that more of the forward weight rests on his right, using the rock in front of him as a makeshift support. Below, the situation has not paused for his personal crisis. The attackers have seen him go down. Voices rise, sharper now, as they try to capitalize. Suppressive fire cracks into the lip of the rock he is using as cover, sending tiny chips of stone scattering. Someone down there is maneuvering, expecting that the Marine above will do what wounded defenders often do, cling to a spot, desperate and static. Watson is painfully aware of how many magazines he has left. The small stack beside him, partly shadowed, looks thinner than it did before. He counted 10 earlier in the day. He knows he has used several in the climb and the defense. A quick check with his good hand tells him there are 3 full ones within immediate reach. Others may still be in pouches he can get to with effort, but these are the ones he can access easily. 60 rounds. He has seen how fast 60 rounds can disappear when the trigger is held a second too long. But the wound has already begun to change his behavior. He cannot move as quickly. He cannot swing the weapon in wide arcs without paying a physical price. Every motion has to be deliberate. So he leans into that necessity. The next time he lifts the bar, he does so more slowly, bringing the sights into alignment with a care that feels out of place in the chaos. He does not try to sweep an entire area. He picks out individual shapes that break the pattern of the slope, helmets behind a rock, a sliver of movement near a darker patch of ground, the brief tilt of a weapon barrel as someone leans out to gauge the crest. Short bursts would still be possible, but he finds himself trimming them even further, making them almost like rapid single shots. 2 or 3 rounds, tightly spaced, barely enough time between them for the weapon to settle before the next. To anyone watching from afar, it still looks like automatic fire. To him, it feels much closer to the methodical, careful shooting his father had drilled into him back in Alabama, only sped up and wrapped in a different sound profile. The results are noticeable. Each time he fires, one specific patch of the slope reacts. A moving figure drops out of sight and does not reappear. A group that had been gathering behind an outcrop scatters again, feeling the pressure of attention they cannot quite see. The psychological effect of a steady, precise point of fire from above may be even more significant than the physical impact. For the attackers, the picture has become frustrating. They thought they had reduced the hilltop to isolated, disorganized pockets. Instead, every time they try to rebuild momentum up the slope, one particular sector erupts with focused resistance. They respond as doctrine suggests, spreading out more, trying to use angles, bringing up additional riflemen and grenadiers. They coordinate their assaults from multiple directions, hoping to saturate the crest's limited cover and force the defender to divide attention. What they cannot see is how small the defender's world has become. For Watson, the hilltop is not a broad surface anymore. It is a compact network of 2 or 3 workable firing spots around his current location, each with its own set of angles. He moves between them carefully, using his good arm to steady the bar and letting his legs do more of the work his injured shoulder no longer can. His wound enforces a slower tempo, but that slower tempo proves useful. It keeps him from overshooting targets, from wasting rounds in long, unfocused strings. Between bursts, he listens, watches, reads the flow. His field of vision shifts constantly between near and far, checking his immediate cover, then flicking back down the slope to catch the first signs of a new push. The attackers adapt again, this time adding indirect tools. A grenade arcs up toward his general area, thrown from somewhere below with practiced aim. It lands close enough that the blast sends a wave of force against the rock and peppers his legs and boots with fragments. One piece cuts into his left calf, adding another layer of pain to his already overtaxed body. The impact forces a short retreat behind a slightly different contour. Another trace of red appears on the dark ground where he slides. From the enemy perspective, those markings deepen the impression that the hill's defender is weakening physically even if his fire has not yet faltered. Watson notes the new discomfort and files it away. It changes his mobility, limiting how far and how quickly he can shift sideways. But it does not stop him from working within a narrow arc. The bar can still come up. The trigger can still be pressed. The rounds can still go where he tells them to go. He begins to make his movements part of the attacker's miscalculations. After each short burst, he shifts just enough that any retaliatory volley aimed at his previous position finds only stone and empty space. The small blood trail he leaves in certain directions becomes a misleading hint, pointing enemy eyes towards spots he no longer occupies. Down below, their numbers are not infinite. Every attempt to climb that slope under his fire costs them something: time, energy, and people. Officers who expected to clear this hill quickly now have to decide whether to keep feeding soldiers into a contest that is proving far more stubborn than anticipated. Watson cannot see those decisions being made, but he can feel their consequences. The intervals between full-scale pushes grow slightly longer. Reconnaissance probes increase. Single individuals or pairs trying to slip up the side, test his attention, find a blind spot. He answers each probe with the same calm, measured insistence. One short, precise engagement at a time. After several such exchanges, he pauses long enough to check his magazines again. 2 full ones. 1 partially used in the weapon. Roughly 40 rounds left. He has already shaped the engagement significantly. The slope directly below his sector bears the signs of repeated attempts. Gear lies abandoned where people dropped it in a hurry. Several spots stay suspiciously still. The hilltop is still in friendly hands, or at least in his hands, but the cost has been exacting. He understands something quietly profound. No matter how this ends for him personally, the attackers have already failed to accomplish what they were sent here to do in the time and with the ease they expected. That realization does not make him complacent. It makes him more intent. He settles his injured shoulder against the rock in a way that minimizes the strain, adjusts his stance to protect his leg as much as possible, and prepares for whatever the next phase of this improvised duel will be. The next phase arrives not as a trickle, but as a coordinated surge. From 3 different points down the slope, groups of attackers begin to move almost simultaneously. Someone below has decided that the gradual approach is costing too much. Instead of parceling out small squads, they commit a larger portion of their force at once, hoping that sheer volume and multifaceted pressure will overwhelm the lone stubborn point on the crest. Watson counts quickly as shapes break from cover and dart forward. Clusters of 3, 4, 5. A dozen here, another 10 there. They are not packed tightly, but they are moving in a way that says this is meant to be decisive. Their fire becomes more intense as they advance, individual shots combining into a sheet of noise that claws at the edges of his position. He can no longer engage each separate group as a distinct problem. The volume of targets has passed the threshold where selective, single-thread focus is enough. Yet he still cannot afford to revert to continual, wide-area spraying. His remaining ammunition is too limited. So he looks for patterns. The leftmost group is closest. They have chosen a route that brings them under his line of sight sooner, using a shallow depression for part of their path before they have to climb across a more exposed patch. The central group is farther out but has fewer rocks to work with. The rightmost group is partially masked by a low ridge that will give them a brief window of protection as they move. He chooses to act against the near threat first, not because it is inherently more dangerous, but because its next move will put it in a position to create problems he cannot easily solve later. The bar comes up again. He bites back a grimace as his shoulder protests. 1 magazine almost full, 2 in reserve, each one now a finite resource with very clear boundaries. He fires a series of short bursts into the left group's path, not at random but at those precise points where they must break from the depression and climb over bare ground. The effect is immediate. Individuals drop back behind the last bit of cover they had, pressing themselves flat. Others freeze halfway up, unwilling to continue into visibly dangerous air. He does not wait to see the full outcome. As soon as he registers the brief pause in their movement, he shifts his attention to the center. The central group, lacking substantial cover, has been relying on speed and volume of fire. They are counting on the hilltop defender being too preoccupied or shaken to aim carefully. They are slightly farther away, but the angle is clean. He leads them by a fraction, letting the bar's rounds intersect the line along which they are running. Another burst. This one is longer, but still under control. The recoil tries to climb the muzzle, but he corrects with small nudges. He sees several figures stumble or twist as the zone in front of them becomes hostile. The rest spread out instinctively, trying to dilute his focus. That, too, serves his purpose. The more they disperse, the less concentrated their own fire becomes. Only then does he address the rightmost group, those using the low ridge as cover. They have not yet reached the point where they must expose themselves, but they are close. He anticipates where they will have to step up, marks the spot in his mind, and sends a measured string of fire there a heartbeat before they arrive. From below, the experience of these three groups is jarring. Each approach direction was meant to share the burden. If one came under pressure, the others would advance. Instead, all three discover that there is no safe lane, only different forms of risk. Watson's fire pattern is less like a single beam and more like a rotating spotlight that keeps catching people at the exact moments they would prefer to be unnoticed. The price he pays for this broad coverage is reflected in the weight of his magazines. By the time the initial wave of this coordinated surge has stalled, he knows he has used most of one more. He swaps it out for a fresh one, placing the partially spent magazine carefully in a spot where he can reach it again if absolutely necessary. 20 rounds in the gun. 1 full spare. 1 partial. The math is simple enough that he does not need to say it out loud. The attackers are not blind to their own situation. They know they are facing a defender with limited ammunition. They can estimate, roughly, how many magazines a person can realistically carry up a slope like this and how many must be left after so much firing. Their calculations are not precise, but they shape their next decisions. Instead of pulling back completely, they settle into a pattern of pressure, constant enough to keep him from repositioning too broadly, light enough to avoid walking directly into his line of sight as a concentrated group. They are trying to stretch the engagement, make time work for them. Every minute that passes is another minute in which the wounded, isolated Marine on the crest loses strength, clarity, or both. Watson senses this shift in tempo. The bursts aimed at him become less intense but more persistent. It is like standing under a steady drizzle instead of a sudden storm. He uses that relative lull to adjust his breathing, to clear some of the ringing from his head, and to rethink distances. He has been reacting well so far. Now he needs to anticipate again. The field directly below his position is cluttered with the physical signs of prolonged activity: disturbed sand, unused gear, the unnatural stillness of places where movement has stopped permanently. Farther out, shadows and indentations mark the presence of people who have chosen to halt for now. His instinct tells him that the next major move from the attackers will not be another three-way rush. That cost them too much. More likely, they will attempt something more inventive, a flanking maneuver, perhaps, or a slow crawl up a side he cannot easily watch. He edges along the crest as much as his leg allows, finding a slightly higher vantage point that gives him a wider view without exposing more than a fraction of his head and shoulders. The bar's weight is a constant companion, forcing him to plan movements more carefully than someone with a lighter rifle might. From this new angle, he spots a subtle change, a group of figures far to the right, moving lower, trying to circle around the hill's shoulder. If they succeed, they could approach from an angle that reduces his ability to bring fire to bear effectively. They are not in range for precise work yet, but they will be. He has a choice. He can wait, let them come closer, and engage them when they pose a more immediate threat. Or he can invest some of his remaining ammunition in disrupting their plan early, even if that means shooting at longer distance with lower probability of immediate impact. He chooses early disruption. The sight picture is smaller, the silhouettes less distinct. He compensates by firing shorter, sharper bursts, using the bar almost as a series of rapid, paired shots. The first string lands near them, kicking up visible puffs of disturbed ground. They react, flattening out, rethinking the wisdom of that path. They do not disappear entirely, but their movement slows and spreads. Whatever precise timing they may have been hoping for is lost. Again, from the perspective of the attackers, the experience is unnerving. It reinforces the emerging impression that the defender on the crest is not simply reacting to whatever appears directly in front of him. He is watching wider arcs and punishing attempts to be clever. The cost to him is real. He feels the magazine's weight decreasing with each controlled burst. When he finally pauses, he swaps again, this time inserting the last fully loaded magazine he has within reach. 20 rounds. The partial magazine sits beside him, its remaining cartridges unknown but certainly less than a full load. He saves it for the very last moment, a final resource in a fight that has gradually stripped away everything else. Below, the enemy commander, wherever he is, now faces a different kind of dilemma. Continuing to throw forces at this hill may achieve the objective of eliminating the defender eventually, but it will do so at a price that is beginning to look disproportionate. The ridge had strategic value. It offered a vantage point and a firing platform. But there are other ridges, other platforms. At what point does this become more about pride and less about practicality? Watson, of course, does not hear that internal debate. All he hears are the sounds in front of him: feet on stone, occasional shouted words, the irregular crack of rifles that may be aimed at him or at someone else nearby. His world remains compressed to a small set of variables he can actually influence. One of those variables is about to be tested again. The final large-scale effort to take the hill begins with something deceptively simple: a pause that is longer than the others. For nearly a full minute, the volume of fire from below drops significantly. There are still occasional single shots, but the patterned bursts aimed at his position stop. The quiet feels different from the earlier lulls born of confusion. This one has more structure to it, like a held breath before a big decision. Watson uses the time to reposition slightly, shifting his weight to ease the strain on his leg and injured shoulder. He changes his angle just enough to refresh his view of the most likely approach routes. The bar rests along the edge of the rock, barrel angled down but ready to rise. The attack, when it comes, is concentrated. Rather than multiple groups from widely spaced directions, a larger number of soldiers begin moving from a narrower band on the slope. It is not a reckless rush. It is controlled, with individuals using what cover remains, overlapping fields of supporting fire aimed in his general direction to keep his head down. From their perspective, this may be the last push. From his, it is simply the largest. He lifts the bar and feels the familiar resistance of the sling and the gun's mass. The injured shoulder complains, but he has long since moved past listening to that discomfort as anything more than background noise. The magazine seated in the receiver is full. The cartridges inside represent the clearest, most finite boundary he has encountered in this fight. 20 rounds to influence the course of this one more time. He chooses his first targets carefully. The leading elements of the assault are using a particular line of rocks and craters as stepping stones. They have to traverse short stretches of open ground between each one. He picks those gaps and times his bursts to meet them there. The first series of shots hits exactly where he intends, forcing the lead attackers to throw themselves down. Some do not get up again. Those behind them hesitate, the rhythm of their advance broken. Supporting fire from further down the slope increases, lashing the crest with rounds that spark and chip against stone. Watson shrinks his profile as much as he can without losing sight of the field. He waits a beat, then comes up again just enough to send another short burst into a slightly different patch, this time aimed at a group that has tried to swing a little left, hoping to exploit a perceived weak side. Each engagement is now a trade not just of ammunition for effect, but of exposure for influence. Every time he shows even a fraction of himself, he risks drawing concentrated attention. But if he does not appear, the attackers can move unchallenged. He threads a careful line between these extremes. The magazine's internal space gradually empties, each cartridge leaving the gun with a familiar mechanical sequence. He no longer has the luxury of ignoring the count. In the back of his mind, he tracks approximate usage. That burst was 4, that one may be 3, the longer one probably closer to 5. Around the halfway mark, he senses that the attackers are closer than before. The sounds are different now, the muted crunch of boots on the upper slope, the sharper quality of voices rising in urgency. They have paid a price to get here, but some of them have managed to reach positions closer to the crest. He cannot allow them to mass for a final upward push. He shifts his aim slightly downward, catching the edges of those nearer positions. Short, precise taps. The bar bucks gently in his grip, the recoil now something he rides rather than fights. Every sense he has is focused outward, drawing in signals from the slope in front of him and turning them into choices. When the magazine finally runs dry, he feels it as much as hears it. The bolt's motion changes, the lack of fresh rounds behind it altering the rhythm of the weapon. He does not wait for a click. He rolls the bar to the side, hits the catch, and lets the empty magazine fall. The partial one comes up from the rock beside him, sliding into place with a motion that is slower than earlier in the day but still smooth. This last magazine is lighter. He does not know exactly how many rounds are in it. He can guess. Perhaps 8. Perhaps 10. Not enough to sustain anything protracted. Enough, maybe, to break one more coordinated move. He uses them that way. Instead of trying to hold down every potential approach, he waits for a very specific moment, the instant when several attackers near the top commit together, rising from cover to try and cross the final few yards to the crest. It is a moment charged with their own calculations. They know they cannot linger below forever. They must close the distance if they want to finish what they started. He sees the first of them move, then the second, then a third further to the side trying to time his sprint. The bar rises one more time. These last rounds are fired with a kind of calm intensity that feels different from everything earlier. There is no rush to the trigger. No temptation to hold it down. Each squeeze is deliberate, each muzzle movement intentional. The individuals who had committed to the final dash are suddenly confronted not with a distant, scattered resistance, but with focused, personal opposition. For them, the world narrows to the immediate threat of the crest and the invisible line of fire that defends it. When the last cartridge leaves the barrel, Watson knows it. The recoil stops. The mechanism cycles on emptiness. The familiar feel of a ready weapon is replaced by a different sensation, a heavy object that has given all it can for the moment. He lowers the bar slowly, letting it rest against the rock. The slope in front of him is strangely still. The attackers who had been poised for that final climb are no longer standing. Others remain in cover farther down, but the energy of the push has dissipated. The air on the hilltop carries the muted echo of activity from other parts of the island, distant engines, intermittent bursts of fire, but in his immediate circle, there is a brief, almost fragile quiet. He breathes. He is aware, in a detached way, of his own condition. The shoulder wound throbs in time with his heartbeat. His leg twinges whenever he shifts. His throat is dry. His clothes are dusted with dark sand and lighter flakes of rock. Every muscle feels both tense and oddly hollow, as if they have been emptied of reserves but are still holding form through habit alone. He has no idea how much time has passed since the first group emerged from the tunnel below. Minutes, certainly. Enough for the sun to climb slightly, enough for the shadows to change shape on the slope. For him, it feels like a long, continuous present, without clear edges. What he does know is that the hilltop has not changed hands. Not yet. Relief does not arrive as a dramatic wave of fresh troops sweeping up the hill. It comes in fragments and hints, the way most real-world solutions do. First, there are voices behind him that do not belong to his own small circle. Familiar accents, familiar phrases, carried on the wind from the direction of the slope they had used to climb earlier. Then, the unmistakable sound of boots on loose volcanic soil, growing closer. Watson turns carefully, mindful of how much his body protests sudden movements. A few figures in marine uniforms appear, moving with caution appropriate to a battlefield where not every silhouette is friendly by default. Their eyes sweep the crest, taking in the altered landscape, the scattered positions, the single man still holding the bar close like a piece of himself. One of them, an NCO by the look of his gear, lets out a low exhale and shakes his head slightly as he walks over. He doesn't start with questions. He starts with a simple, grounding statement. "You're still up here." Watson nods once, not trusting his voice immediately. He is not entirely sure what he would say first, even if he did speak. The reality of what has just happened has not fully caught up with him yet. The newcomers begin to move methodically, checking the crest, confirming that there are no enemy positions tucked away on the far side, no surprises waiting to punish an unwary step. They call down to others below, relaying that the top is, for the moment, secure. Only when that practical work has begun in earnest, does someone kneel beside Watson and take a closer look at him. The medic's hands are efficient but careful, probing around the shoulder, assessing the leg, checking for other less obvious injuries. His expression is focused, but there's a flicker of something else there too, a mix of curiosity and respect directed as much at the man as at the situation he has evidently held together. "Can you walk?" he asks. Watson tests his leg gently. It responds, though every bit of pressure makes the wound aware of itself. Walking will be possible, but not comfortable. Running is out of the question. "Yeah," he answers, finally trusting his voice enough for that one word. "Good. We'll get you started down and then onto a stretcher if we need to. That hilltop's done its part for today." Done its part. It's a simple phrase, but it carries weight. This piece of ground, which a few hours ago was just a contour on a map and then a target in someone else's fire plan, has become a small case study in how much difference one determined defender with the right tool and mindset can make. As they help him to his feet, Watson looks around one more time. The bar hangs from its sling, barrel angled down, metal dulled by dust and heat but intact. There are magazines strewn near his earlier positions, empty shells of effort spent. The rock has fresh chips where rounds struck. The soil bears the marks of scrambling feet, both friendly and hostile. Further down the slope, the pattern is even more telling. Discarded equipment lies scattered where attackers had dropped it. Some spots remain quietly occupied by those who will not move again. Other figures in the distance are already being carried or helped back down by their own comrades, the fight on this particular incline over for now. Watson does not count. Someone else will. Later, when officers and analysts walk the ground with notebooks and maps, they will tally distances, estimate numbers, and assign figures. They will come up with an approximate total of how many enemy soldiers were put out of action in the immediate area around the positions he held. That number, around 60, will be the one that makes it into reports, recommendations, and eventually citations. For the moment, he is less interested in numerics than in simple forward motion. Each careful step down the hill is a reminder of both survival and cost. The bar bumps against his side. It feels heavier than ever now, but that heaviness has taken on a new meaning. When he reaches a point where the slope becomes too awkward for a wounded man to descend safely, others take over. A stretcher appears. Hands secure him. The world tilts into a new orientation as they lift and begin to carry him back toward aid stations and the next phase of his personal journey through this war. From his new vantage point, face angled upward toward the sky, the sounds change again. The island is still very much alive with conflict. Other units are engaged elsewhere. Other hills and ravines are being fought over. His own 15 minutes on this particular crest are a small piece of a much larger, ongoing effort. But even small pieces can bend the overall shape. By the time he reaches a battalion aid station, the outlines of what happened on the hill are already being retold in shortened form. Marines who glimpsed parts of his stand arrive with their own versions, each one accurate in its own limited scope. One saw him push back a flanking group. Another watched through binoculars as repeated enemy assaults up the slope faltered under his fire. A third heard the distinctive rhythm of the bar carrying on long after most other guns on that ridge had gone quiet. Officers listen, filtering anecdote into narrative. They know better than to rely solely on excited retellings. They will send people up to walk the ground, to examine shell patterns, to study spent cartridges and impact marks. Still, the core of the story emerges quickly and remains consistent. Against significant odds, one Marine with a too-heavy automatic rifle held a key position long enough to blunt an entire company-sized effort. In the days that follow, as the broader battle for Iwo Jima grinds on, the details of Hill 203, or whatever number corresponds to this particular height in the formal records, become the subject of quiet conversations in planning tents and briefing rooms. The bar, once regarded by many as an awkward legacy piece from an earlier war, is suddenly the center of attention. Not because the weapon has magically changed, because someone has demonstrated, vividly, what it can do when removed from the neat boxes doctrine had placed it in. Once Watson is transferred from the aid station to a hospital ship offshore, his immediate world shrinks to the size of a bunk, a white ceiling, and the routines of medical staff who move with calm efficiency around and over him. The island becomes a distant shape on the horizon, then disappears entirely as the ship relocates. He focuses on healing, on relearning basic movements with an injured shoulder, on enduring the necessary procedures that will restore as much function as possible to his leg. He knows, vaguely, that he has been recommended for a high award. The words remarkable action and extraordinary courage appear in conversations around his bed. But the full scope of what his stand on the hill has set in motion is not something he sees firsthand. That story unfolds elsewhere. In a tent back on the island, an officer from the battalion's intelligence section spreads maps and sketches across a table. His notes include range estimates, diagrams of the slope, and careful marks showing where enemy positions were located and how they were engaged. The bar that Watson used lies on another table, surrounded by technical personnel who inspect it piece by piece. They look for signs of stress, cracks in the metal, where in the moving parts, any hint that the extended use under intense conditions pushed the weapon beyond its designed limits. They find none. The barrel shows normal heat wear. The action cycles smoothly. The magazines, though empty and scuffed, are structurally sound. The ammunition expenditure is estimated based on those magazines and on the number of cartridge cases found near Watson's firing positions. The resulting figure, around 200 rounds during the core 15-minute period of intense engagement, catches the attention of planners. On one hand, it is a large portion of a single Marine's carry load. On the other, the effects it produced are hard to ignore. An entire enemy company's momentum was checked, then broken, by that investment of cartridges. In reports that travel up the chain of command, several themes begin to appear. First, that automatic weapons, when used aggressively and intelligently in close-range fighting, can deliver outsized tactical results compared to their traditional stationary role. Second, that the weight and bulk of such weapons, while real, may be less of a liability in certain environments than previously assumed, especially when those same environments make static positions untenable. Third, that training which emphasizes only one way to use a tool can blind soldiers and leaders to other, potentially more effective uses in real-world conditions. None of this is entirely new in the abstract. Military history is full of examples where individuals improvised under pressure and discovered novel applications for existing equipment. But specific, well-documented cases like Watson's provide concrete illustrations that doctrine writers can point to when arguing for change. Over the remaining months of the Pacific Campaign, small arms instructors begin to adjust how they talk about the Browning automatic rifle in particular, and about automatic weapons in general. Live-fire exercises incorporate more movement with a barman, more emphasis on advancing under self-generated fire rather than anchoring in one spot. Units that had previously treated the bar as a reluctant necessity now start to see it as a weapon uniquely suited for breaking through microscale strongpoints, bunkers, caves, fortified rooms. The idea of the gun being too heavy does not vanish. Weight is still a fact, but it is balanced against new appreciation for what those pounds can buy in the right hands. At the institutional level, the story of Hill 203 feeds into a longer ongoing conversation about how much flexibility to build into tactics. Watson's action exists alongside other notable episodes from different parts of the war, each one a reminder that real combat rarely looks like a textbook. For Watson himself, the recognition comes in more formal wording. A citation is drafted that describes how, while isolated and wounded, he held a key position and prevented repeated enemy attempts to retake it, neutralizing a large number of opposing troops in the process. The language is measured, respectful, and focused on character, indomitable spirit, conspicuous gallantry, refusal to yield. What the citation does not do in detail is recount the technical and tactical subtleties, the decision to abandon a fixed role for the bar, the shift to mobile, close-range engagement, the deliberate rationing of ammunition under extraordinary stress, the way wounds forced him into an even more efficient, more precise style of shooting. Those aspects are left to after-action reports and, later, to historians and tacticians. Some of them, writing in quieter times after the war, point out an irony. By 1945, the Browning automatic rifle was already on a conceptual path toward retirement. Designers and planners were thinking about lighter weapons, different calibers, new systems that would better match peacetime assumptions about how infantry should move and fight. The bar's days as a standard issue tool were numbered. In that sense, Watson's 15 minutes on a volcanic hill can be seen as both a culmination and a farewell, a moment when a weapon often criticized for its shortcomings revealed its full potential just as its institutional life was drawing to a close. Yet the core lesson is not about that specific piece of steel and wood alone. It is about the interplay between people and tools. A weapon designed for one kind of war found its true voice in another when a person carrying it was willing to rethink how it could be used. A piece of equipment labeled too heavy and ill-suited became, in the hands of someone who understood both its strengths and the reality of the ground under his feet, exactly the right instrument for a highly specific challenge. The defenders on Iwo Jima had built their underground fortress around certain assumptions, that Marines would avoid unnecessary exposure, that automatic weapons would mostly anchor from fixed points, that momentum would be limited by caution. On that hill, for a brief period, one Marine rewrote those expectations. He moved forward when a diagram would have told him to stay back. He treated a support weapon as a personal offensive tool. He adjusted his technique under the pressure of injury and limited resources, becoming more effective as the situation grew worse. When future generations of Marines study such actions, they often focus on the courage involved, and rightly so. It takes a particular kind of resolve to advance into fire, to remain at a post when retreat seems logical, to continue functioning under pain and isolation. But there is another layer worth noticing. Watson's story is also about adaptability, the ability to see beyond the labels attached to a piece of gear or a tactic, to recognize what actually works in the moment, and to commit fully to that new understanding even if it runs counter to what was taught. On a February morning in 1945, on a hill of dark volcanic rock above a crowded beach, that adaptability, combined with a too-heavy gun and 15 compressed minutes of desperate clarity, allowed one Marine to hold a line that, by most calculations, should not have held. The defenders expected the automatic rifle to be a clumsy relic. Instead, it became the center of a short, intense chapter in which their carefully prepared plan bent around the unexpected determination of a single person. That is the heart of the story, not simply that one Marine engaged around 60 opposing soldiers in a quarter of an hour, but that he did so by reimagining, in real time, what his much-maligned weapon could be. The hill is quiet now. The rock still remembers the weight of boots, the vibration of distant bombardment, the echo of rifle fire. Somewhere in that memory, there is also the steady, rhythmic voice of a Browning automatic rifle that refused to stay where the manual said it belonged.